Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Audrey Stewart, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I am so pleased to welcome you to tonight's event with Tom Vanderbilt discussing his newest book, Beginners, The Joy and Transformative Power of Lifelong Learning. He is joined tonight in conversation by Faith Salie. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our new digital community during these challenging times. Our spring season is ramping up, so make sure to check out our event schedule on harvard.com/events, where you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our shelves from home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question at any time during the chat, go to the bottom of your screen and click on the Q&A button, and we'll get through as many questions as we have time for. If you'd like to purchase a copy of Beginners, there will be a link in the chat where you can purchase. All sales through this link support Harvard Bookstore, so thank you, especially during this difficult time for community spaces like your local bookstore. There will also be a link in the chat for donation if you would like to give additional support to Harvard Bookstore. Your purchases and financial contributions make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever supports the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you so much for tuning in support of our authors and our incredible staff of booksellers here at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these past many months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as we can. Thank you in advance for your patience and your understanding. Now I am so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Tom Vanderbilt has written for many publications, including the New York Times Magazine, the Wall Street Journal Magazine, the Financial Times, and the London Review of Books, among many others. He is a contributing editor of Wired UK, and his previous books include You May Also Like, The Taste in an Age of Endless Choice, and Traffic, Why We Drive the Way We Do, and What It Says About Us. He has been a visiting scholar at NYU's Rudin Center for Transportation, a research fellow at the Canadian Center of Architecture, and a winner of the Warhol Foundation's Arts Writers Grant, among other honors. He is joined tonight in conversation by Faith Salie. Faith is a four-time Emmy-winning contributor to CBS Sunday Morning and a regular on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Faith is the author of Approval Junkie, which she will be starring in on Broadway in 2021. She has interviewed thousands of people as the host of a dozen podcasts. Faith is a Rhodes Scholar who received her MPhil in literature from Oxford University. Tonight, they're discussing Tom's new book, Beginners. It starts with the question of why adults stop learning new skills. Then it follows Tom through his journey of trying to change that through his learning of chess, singing, surfing, drawing, and juggling, all while researching the benefits of adult skill building. Malcolm Gladwell said about it, Beginners belongs with David Epstein's Range on the list of books that have changed the way I understand my own limitations. And on that note of high praise, I'll turn things over to our authors. Tom, Faith, thank you so much for being here. The virtual podium is yours.
Thank you, Audrey. Audrey, you just gave me a huge promotion because with any luck with vaccines, my show will be off Broadway, but you said I'm going to be on Broadway. I'm just going to embrace that. Oh I love that.
Well, I'll just cross my fingers.
I've been quite off Broadway during the pandemic. So thank you very much. And
thank you for being here.
Tom, I have to start with the beautiful color of this book. Did you know that this color would be Pantone's color of the year in 2021?
Very good call. Yeah, I think it's called Illuminating Yellow, yeah. And I did not know, unfortunately. Maybe the sort of the brain trust at my publisher did, but no, I don't. You know, the problem with this book, with any book nowadays, is that many authors have had books sort of like an airplane at LaGuardia. We've been stacked up for a while, waiting to land. But the pandemic. So this was supposed to come out a little while ago, but it turned out that last March or so, wasn't a great time to release a book. So yeah, it would have been very ahead of the curve had the book come out with that lovely yellow, and then Pantone declares it color of the year.
Right.
That would have looked really good. But yeah, so
it would have been called Beginner's Yellow.
Exactly.
But I have a feeling that you're going to hear this a lot from people, but I feel like this book came into my life exactly at the right time. Because first of all, have you heard that? Do people keep saying that to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the last year we all, well, number one, we all became sort of beginners, right? I mean, we had to sort of, we haven't lived through a global pandemic before, most of us. So we had to suddenly learn new ways to work, to communicate, to remote school, all these things. We took these fledgling steps, and it took us a little while to, get sort of good at how to shop.
Spend time with our spouses, unending time with our spouses.
Yeah, and that learning curve goes on, I think, for many people. But
or to understand how flatulent your children are when they're home all day. I have a new respect for teachers, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, and we've all, the list goes on. So, but of course, we all had, not all of us, but some of us had more time than others during this pandemic, and we couldn't go outside. So suddenly you're faced with your own four walls. You've binged through everything watchable on Netflix. You've read all your books. What do you do then? No surprise, people started turning to all of these pursuits that they've long wanted to take a crack at, and ranging from sourdough bakery. I mean, King Arthur Flour in Vermont was deluged with calls. How do I bake sourdough? So what can you do in your house? This is the one benefit I had of writing this book, was that most of the things I was sort of working on, I could continue doing in my house in some form, even if not as rewarding as they were in kind of the before times. I mean, for example, singing, if you read the book, I really got quite a charge out of singing with people in my choir. That turns out, this is sort of a cosmic joke played by someone on me and some other people. Choir singing is the most dangerous thing, almost like medically proven, that you can do. It's a virtual super spreader event, just to sing with other people. Exhaling a lot of breath in a closed, hot New York City room with like 50 people turns out not a good idea. So I've lost choir, but many other things.
I guess a choir in New York City is about as close as you could come to like a far right terrorist insurrection, maskless terrorist insurrection when it comes to the viral load.
There's a lot of crossover in many ways. No, I'm just joking. No, but yeah. So, but yeah, I think another key point, though, I think is the pandemic just was a huge disruptor of habits, and often I think what gets in the way of people starting on new things is habitual life, like the status quo, inertia. You're just sort of, well, I don't have time for that. You make all these excuses because you're busy with all these things that you're normally busy with. Suddenly you don't have those things. Hey, you have this yawning gap in your life, or just a new way to think about things. So suddenly you start thinking about, I don't know, the ballet you once did when you were in as a teenager. To the story in the Washington Post today I was reading, which this woman was taking back up ballet after 20 or 30 years. Her, she remember, it's kind of like riding a bike. You don't forget, but it's going to be climbing back up that learning curve. But now is the time for her to do that.
So you mentioned riding a bike, and my very specific, very present connection with the book is that in the last 3 weeks, my kids, who are 6 and 8, have learned to ride bikes, which, if you don't live in the city, you don't realize it's kind of a big deal. Like you have to make a deliberate effort to make sure city kids learn how to ride bikes. My husband, who just turned 50, grew up in New York City, and he just learned how to ride a bike in the last 3 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. And my kids learned how to ski. And during this pandemic, like right before it started, I gave my husband a saxophone. His whole life, he said, I want to learn how to play the sax. And I have seen so much joy come out of him from playing the saxophone with his teachers in Japan. Is a jazz saxophonist. He and Yuki hang out, and he plays the saxophone. And he's also started learning about tea ceremonies. I'm not involved, so I don't know what the tea ceremonies entail. But my husband is so, like, he has a light in his eyes. He has this breathlessness about beginning, right? And my kids feel so excited. And I had always thought, and you were speaking to me right at the beginning, because I had always thought, well, I love what I do. I don't need a hobby. I get to ask people questions all the time. I'm someone who helps people tell stories. I tell my story. So I'm always learning something new, right? But as you point out right at the beginning, because this was also your experience as a journalist, we're learning new information, but we're not learning how, right?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I absorb information. I get asked to do an article about the pallet, the shipping pallet. I was reading, years worth of back issues of not one pallet magazine that exists out there. There's actually two trade magazines about shipping pallets.
I don't even know what a pallet is, Tom. What is a pallet? Isn't it?
A shipping pallet, the wood, those pieces of wood that they stack boxes on to ship things around the world, and you usually find them like in alleys because people throw them out. They don't know what to do with them when they're done with them. But
okay.
So just to make the point that I over absorb knowledge, but what did I actually know how to do? And this was brought home to me one day when my daughter's school had a parent talent show. I mean, right away, this word, that phrase just struck terror into my heart. But the other thing is that I couldn't think of anything I could actually do. I can write a great, 200-word intro for like a servicey magazine piece on, some trend, but I didn't think kids really wanted to see that. I'm a pretty good parallel parker, but beyond that, okay, what? So ended up not going to the talent show. I couldn't learn anything quickly enough, but it just raised this thing in my life. Okay, I know all this stuff. I was on Jeopardy, like absorbing knowledge, information, but I had sort of given up the idea of learning how to do things. And I think in part, like what you just said, I love my job. I don't need this stuff. I don't need all that other weird stuff. And the second though is, why would I want, I'm okay at this stuff. Why would I want to take on board this other stuff into my life that I'm actually probably not going to be very good at least for a while? Why would I want the stress, the agitation, the potential humiliation, and onward? But the story about your husband is great because that is exactly what I've been going through. Where, I mean, number one, it's just that hour with your teacher, if you have the luxury of having a teacher, is just, it's therapeutic. It feels like there's this hour that's out there. It's for you. You're engaging in this different part of yourself.
Yeah, and he now will hear music and he'll like, come over here, listen to this. Do you hear what he's doing with the sax there? And I'm like, that sort, I say yes, and because I come from an improv background, but he's hearing music in a new way. I mean, it all speaks to what you talk about in your book. And I wanted to say that, I was all smug about, well, I love what I do. I don't need to try anything new. And I'm now doing a story for CBS Sunday Morning on the history of tap dancing. And people are now taking up tap dancing in their homes. And these companies that you were talking about, the King Arthur flower is like selling out. Well, companies that make homemade mobile tap boards are also like, there's a month-long wait list. So I get one because I know I'm going to have to tap on camera with one of the world's best tap dancers. And I haven't tapped since I was 13. And I start tapping with my kid's teacher who comes over masked, and we open the windows. Right. And I'm like, I forgot how much I love this. And I forgot, my memory was that I was so good at it and I wasn't very good at it. And instead of that making me feel crushed, I got so excited. I had visions of the future.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, number one, have you talked to your downstairs neighbors yet? I mean, that's sort of the...
We've gotten a few calls.
But this is a thing, you talk about going back to your childhood, that, for a lot of these things, some of the things that I'm taking up, singing, drawing, these were things that we all did as children. I mean, everyone sang in some kind of school pageant or whatever, or you sang in church, or you just sang around the house, or you drew, right? You doodled in your notebooks, you doodled everywhere. And then, at some point, the school sort of stops teaching that stuff because it's not deemed to be, an essential part of the curriculum. Even though drawing, the argument has been made that it's an essential way of sort of visually understanding the world, and maybe it should be taught not as an artistic discipline, but just as more sort of a skill in the way that you teach handwriting. But the other thing though is that kids, the curriculum falls off, and then kids are sort of told that they're not that particularly great at those things, so they sort of get discouraged. They start getting
trapped. Right? If you don't show talent, like we have this mindset of talent, right? I mean, beginners is a lot about a growth mindset, right?
Yes, I'm huffing the fumes of the growth mindset. This is, I would not exist if it were not for the growth mindset, because this says that, yeah, it's not about innate talent. If I thought, if I really thought it was about innate talent, I wouldn't sing note one, but the thought is there that, maybe I could, well, I don't want to get too deep into that, but yeah, like
we're gonna get deep. Don't worry.
Okay, it's like, but I could, train myself through some work and to get back. I mean, I don't even know if I had skill when I was younger, because we don't think about it, skill at singing. We just sing.
Yeah.
And no one cares, and parents are indulgent, and it's children singing, right? So, but what does happen is this rapid skill fall off, because guess what? We don't practice singing because we think we're not good at it. So they did these interesting studies that by basically college age, people had fallen off, and they could no longer even hold these notes that they could as children. So this kind of vicious cycle sets in where, it's no small wonder that people are afraid to sing or think they don't have a good voice, because they haven't sung since they were 6 years old. And it's less about the innate talent than like any other motor skill. You have to work at it, practice it, develop it, have someone listen to you, put in the work. I have sort of a hang up about singing here. Like that is the one thing I think in particular, even more than sports. And this has been backed up by some research and people I talk to, that we really think it's this God-given talent, this innate thing. And that innate thing, there's no growth mindset there. That's just like, you have it. So why would you bother to work at it? You either have it or you don't. But the point is that, we can all have it. I'm not saying we're all going to be at Carnegie Hall next week, but, and one last point here, sorry to be on the high horse, but, this is not to say we all have to be experts at singing. We all have to have 10,000 hours. We all have to be amazing to be on reality TV shows like The Voice or whatever. But just to bring back again singing as this, thing we can all be like a little bit good at and do in the living room with friends over, and like a social thing that people used to do, and before we started feeling bad about our voices. And I sort of call it the national vocal insecurity complex that we just all sort of had. And I mean, one of my favorite studies, these researchers were trying to study embarrassment, the psychology of embarrassment. How do you get a bunch of people to be embarrassed on cue? There's probably a lot of things you could do here, like get their high school yearbook or something, but they had them sing a Temptations song, I think. And lo and behold, they were all embarrassed, and the researchers could study embarrassment. So I'm not going to sing on camera.
I know you're not.
But,
I already asked, but maybe I'm going to remind folks that there's a Q&A. So maybe if enough people put in the queue, Tom, will you please sing? Maybe a few requests.
If we can get a Zoom choir going,
yeah.
I want everyone out there to join.
I want to talk about language around beginning, because even you broke down words that we're all familiar with, and it changed the way I recognized my own negativity around beginning, right? So here are some words, and I want you to tell us, their origins: dilettante, amateur, mediocre, and novice. Will you talk to us about those words?
Sure. Dilettante, which I think to most people out there will sound kind of negative. He's a dilettante, she's a dilettante, comes from, I guess, the Italian dilettare, or is it the Latin? Excuse me, my education is showing here, but it means simply to take delight in, and it comes from this group of the dilettanti, these sort of 18th century people in England that were in love with continental culture, went down to Italy and France and soaked up all of the arts and painting and singing, and then tried to bring that back to England and sort of take delight in it. And maybe they even dabbled in it themselves. Were they Michelangelo? No, but they sort of. So dilettante had this. The dilettanti was a positive thing. I mean, these were by the time, though, I think it was is it Jane Austen? You can find that word having a negative cast. These are just sort of the idle rich, like indulging in these pastimes and whatever. So that's dilettante. Amateur comes from the Latin to love. I mean, to be a lover of something. Like what's so horrible about that? Yet we have this. It's amateur hour or whatever, has kind of this negative cast. So, and this is something that, when I was trying to join a choir, for example, in New York City, I typed in the words amateur choir, New York City. And, the word amateur, just means not professional. So you can take not being professional pretty far and be very good before you actually get paid. So I was finding choirs that were just way above my, pay station there, with like wanting, to sight read music and to do arias and all this sort of thing. And I started wanting, the choir that would take someone like me. So anyway, just the point that amateur is a very broadly expansive word, and it should not have a negative connotation, yet it sort of does. Mediocre, halfway to the top in Latin. So
it's so optimistic.
Yeah, exactly. I make the point, if I could be a mediocre surfer, that would be amazing, because if the top of surfing is, Kelly Slater at Pipeline doing these amazing, if I could do half Kelly Slater, I could quit tomorrow. But so yeah, mediocre, that's bad. Novice, that's basically a beginner monk. So, it kind of just speaks to the point we all have to begin somewhere. I mean, no one, you don't end.
Yeah, and when I looked up novice, I was also related to neophyte. And I don't know if you go into this in the book, but neophyte, I learned, means newly planted. Isn't that lovely?
It is, and I'm learning something right now. So neophyte, yeah. I mean, so, and that's kind of.
I think when you point out, I think there's so much joy in the true meaning of all those words. And so what your message really is reframing our entire thinking about beginning, about being a beginner, right?
Exactly, yeah. And neophyte is great. I love that, newly planted, because I've had the feeling all along that I was sort of tending these different gardens of mine that were these interests. And, I would sort of go off and surf for a while, and then I wasn't doing other things. So I had to go back and give them some water and attention or whatever. But it is this growth process where some gardens may grow a little faster than others. Some may die for a little while. This is, as you take up tap, or your husband takes up saxophone, one thing you may notice is that growth is not always linear. And that's something that can sort of freak us out in the beginning as beginners. You'll be, and they've done studies about this, about juggling. I mean, yes, juggling has been studied in an academic environment quite intensively, but they would see people do like 60 or 70 runs of like 3-ball juggling in a row successfully. Then the next day they would struggle to do 5 or 6. And people would say, wait, yesterday I was doing this. What happened? So learning is sort of like that, these fits and starts. It's non-linear.
And I quoted you to my husband because he's so, no pun intended, he's so jazzed about playing sax. And he said, oh, I can't wait until I can play this song. And I said, well, I'm reading Tom's book about beginners, and you make this analogy of the feeling of beginning. You liken it to falling in love, and you can't hold on to that particular dopamine forever, right? And I said, don't rush it. Like, remember how excited you are now, because in a year you'll work really hard and you'll be able to play that song, and you won't remember how excited you were about just beginning to play the song. Because
I mean,
focused on achieving. Usually.
Yeah, and the growth is so rapid at the beginning. And this is what there's this phrase learning curve. And some people, sort of misunderstand this. They think, well, that means something that's really hard to learn, that you have to climb this learning curve. But it's really just an XY, axis of progress versus time. So, for a lot of people, the learning curve is steep, which means that they're learning a lot of stuff right away. And that's sort of this magic, intoxicating period where, I mean, not only are you learning, but you're learning about that thing too. And suddenly you want to,
you want to enter the community.
Yeah, you want to enter the community. You're on the chat rooms late at night trying to, see what's going on. You're buying stuff. You want all the best gear. You want, so it just becomes intoxicating and a little bit, you can get in over your head for sure.
So folks who haven't read your book yet, should know that you kind of organize it by these 5 things you decide to begin. And, you talk about how these 5 skills, beginning these 5 skills and learning about them changed your life. And I was wondering if you could list for us the 5 things and tell us the one sort of life-changing takeaway that you got from each of them.
Sure. Let's see. I'll start with singing. Singing again, is something that I felt like I don't even know if rediscovering is the right word, because I'm not sure I really remember doing it as a kid, but I feel like it was something I wanted to bring back into my life. And also, I think a lot of us do sing all the time in the shower, in your car, but I wanted to try to approach it with a little more thought and maybe put a little more responsibility behind that. And could I actually, take it from here to here and not quite be so embarrassed about it? So I think that just was incredibly useful I found that sort of a metaphor for getting over a lot of humps in life, just tackling this fear, because as I said, nothing's more embarrassing, nothing's more fearful than public performance, especially singing. So
unless you're me, my kids are always asking me to stop singing.
well,
but with singing, like if you're not a person who loves to perform, it's so vulnerable. Like you are the instrument. It's not balls you're throwing around. It's not a surfboard you carry. Like it's you. And you talk about how at age 49, just saying, hey, I want to learn how to sing. You got the information, for example, that you'd not been speaking correctly your whole life and you needed to learn how to breathe.
Yeah, newsflash. Geez, see, I mean, there's a lot of things. We're all learning things all the time. The internet is always telling us about these things we've been doing wrong our entire life. Like I found this great headline about you've been tying your shoes wrong your whole life. But no, but it turns out, yeah, I like a lot of people. If you listen to voice experts, a lot of us could speak in a more optimal way. I'm not sure if singing has helped my speaking, but it brings up some. Yeah, I mean, vulnerability. I have these weird medical issues I didn't know about. I have vocal fold paresis, which is a paralysis of the vocal folds. So it's a little more of a challenge, which of course, then you're carrying that around in the back of your head. You're like, oh, I just started singing and now I find out I already have this thing plaguing me. So, but yeah, sorry, I forgot well, you want me to go through these 5 things. So
let's first of all list them for folks, right? So it's,
yeah. Singing, drawing, surfing, juggling, and I did a few other sort of side tasks about making this lovely wedding band with a friend of mine, David Allen, and some other things. But anyway, to go back to what your husband for one moment with the tea ceremony.
Yeah.
Learning is an additive, I think, and addictive process where you sort of open these doors and you want to push on. And you suddenly talk about growth mindset. You start with drawing class at the New York Art Academy, and suddenly drawing leads quite naturally to painting, right? Then though, you're walking down the hallway and you see this door open and they're doing this sculpture in there, and you're sort of like, wow, sculpture. I mean, that's like this 3-dimensional drawing or something, and you get to use your hands. People who, if you sit at your computer all day, anyone doing anything with their hands is like this exotic thing that you lust after. So, I just think
the life, I mean, there are many life-changing aspects to all the things you did, but I remember you're saying that drawing changed the way you see the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, the key lesson I took away from drawing really, and this is something that's been talked about by Betty Edwards in her famous book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, but was sort of reinforced by many of the teachers I was with, is that drawing is not really this, how to say, it's not sort of this artistic interpretation of the world. It's being able to see the world as it is and execute that. I sort of said that in a clunky way, but you don't really need this like skill in your hand. It's just about really like studying the world and breaking down that world, and not taking the world that you think you see and getting hung up on like the idea of someone's face as a face, and just trying to draw what you actually see there. And it could be weird little shapes. I mean, art teachers will give you these great examples like, that looks like a head of iceberg lettuce, is someone's like ear or something. So just draw that as a iceberg lettuce, like.
I mean, it sounds very meditative, right? I'm not good at meditating. I hardly ever even try, but in meditation, I know you're supposed to notice your thoughts rather than dig into your thoughts. And it sounds like with drawing, you're supposed to notice and not say, I'm going to make a face. I'm going to notice the parts that make up what might turn out to look like a face, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, and it's important to what you're noticing. You don't want to notice the sort of the gestalt, like face as a face. You want to really drill down to these little things and not get hung up on, I'm drawing Faith Salie right now, but I'm drawing this weird little thing that looks like something else, and I'm just going to try to make sure I get that.
That weird little
exactly.
thing. I hear you. Wait, so tell me me about juggling. Like what was the epiphany from juggling?
I mean, well, juggling, to be honest, was not as much of a lifelong passion, but I was really interested because there's a lot of academic research, and that it's a great way to think about motor skills and to talk about motor skills. And I mean, one interesting thing about juggling, though, is that number one, it doesn't actually take that long to learn to do 3 balls, which is sort of the minimum threshold. But it's an interesting social experiment. You go into a cocktail party or something, and yeah, I'm that guy. But you ask people, hey, who here can 3-ball juggle? And like one person might raise their hand. So you've invested just a little bit of time in this thing, and suddenly you have a skill that no one else has. So if you take it to 4 balls, it's like, forget it. If you take it to 5 balls, then you're in those chat rooms, those like obscure juggling chat rooms at night. But yeah, so juggling is just a fun little, but it has a lot to say about how we learn skills. And one of the most interesting things is that, a week's worth of juggling training has enormous impact on the neural plasticity in your brain. It literally reshapes your brain. So this is something to think about as you're learning any new skill, saxophone, tap dancing. The changes are real and they happen right away. And this is not to say your brain is expanding. I wish that it were so. You're kind of just shifting stuff around from one area to another, but that process itself, I think, has a benefit. Basically, sort of like doing high intensity interval training for your brain. And it's just, there's some interesting research showing that if you do multiple things at once, I mean, not simultaneously, but over the course of a month or whatever, if you're learning different skills, the benefits can even be greater. Sort of switching between these things seems to have a little bit, of a neural benefit there. So yeah,
you anticipated one of my questions. I want to know more about how the brain plays into this, right? So something that you seem to bump up against a lot was this message that the older you get, right, the harder it is to learn, I think, almost everything, correct me if I'm wrong, and the slower it will be to learn. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, especially if we're novices. I mean, there's kind of a key distinction to make here. If you're a chess grandmaster and you started playing when you were 6, to play someone, if you're in your 70s and playing chess, you're still going to be pretty good. If you're trying to learn chess in your 70s, you're going to be at a great disadvantage to someone trying to learn chess when they're 6. I mean, the young brain, as I'm sure we all probably suspect, is just bursting with synapses, neural connections that are there to be made. Also, there's a lot of lifestyle things going on, right? Kids have nothing to do but learn. They have a supportive audience. They have endless amounts of time. I mean, you think of all the great chess grandmasters, Bobby Fischer. I mean, it didn't end well for him, but he spent his youth basically in his room playing chess against himself and reading books endlessly. If I had 10 years right now to suddenly do nothing but try to learn chess all day, I might make a pretty good run at being a grandmaster. Who knows? But yeah, so the key here is novice versus do you already know something? But that plasticity I was talking about, I mean, that never really goes away. We have plasticity now. We're going to have it when we're 60. We're going to have it when we're 70, when we're 80.
Is it that the more we begin something, anything, that, I mean, can we almost make our brains more youthful? Is it the case that the more you're beginning things, the easier it will get, no matter what your age is, to learn new skills?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's something they call learning how to learn, which is a thing itself. I mean, that's another benefit here is once you sort of take on enough things, you start to get the meta drill a little bit of just how to be a beginner, which is kind of a skill in itself. I would argue how to practice, how to accept feedback, how to set your motivation and discipline. But I'm sorry, I forgot the original question there.
I mean, I think you answered that no matter how, I guess I'm looking for the good news, right? So it's a fact that the older you are, the slower we learn and the harder it is to learn something new. But the good news is that there is you can still learn it. And the activity of becoming a beginner over and over, it will sort of create a more nimble brain.
Yeah, I mean, and the research is very clear on this. There's a great study at University of Texas at Dallas. Denise Park's lab had these kind of a variety of people of different ages, kind of in the older range, come in and do these courses that were digital photography and I think quilting. And then they had a control group who came in and just socialized with each other, which, you know, is fine. Also, that's a great thing to do. But those two people, those two different groups took tests beforehand, like a cognitive battery to kind of get your, you know, a sense of your functioning. Then they took those tests afterwards, and the people who took the classes did better on the cognitive battery than the people who just socialized. So there actually was an improvement in their cognitive performance, you know, not about digital photography or quilting, but something about that learning process had given them this little extra nimbleness, as you say. And the key here, I think, too, is that they learned in groups. I mean, there's sort of a magic formula there of learning with people. That social element just really hits the human sweet spot in a particularly powerful way, I think.
I have to tell you, that was part of reading your book with this beautiful illuminating yellow color that made me feel wistful about pre-pandemic times and made me feel hopeful to return to it. Were your descriptions of they were very emotional, and maybe it's because I miss doing musical theater, but your descriptions of the community, the soul-filling communal sense you had with a choir, and also you're bonding with these Upper East Side privileged surfer moms when you go to Costa Rica or wherever you were. Can you talk a little bit more about how community can kind of buoy this beginning, this movement towards beginning?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, you know, fear is this huge thing. So if you sort of go into a situation knowing there are going to be other beginners there, I mean, that automatically just makes it such an easier prospect. Of course, with the choir, I sort of felt like I was moving into a situation where everyone already knew how to sing, and that was a little bit intimidating for different reasons. So I probably lip synced about the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then started making little mumbling noises the 4th week. Maybe by the 5th week, I uttered a note. But then, you know, I just kept at it. And importantly, I was, you know, sort of listening to people next to me, kind of, you know, trying to follow what they were doing. Because not only is the choir director a great source of information and learning, but, you know, your fellow singers. And then, you know, lo and behold, after about, you know, 8 or 9 months, suddenly there's some new people coming to the choir. And I see that stunned, dazed look in their eyes of like, what am I doing here? And I can kind of give them the little nudge on the shoulder and say, hey, I was there not that long ago. And so, you know, it's great to have that sort of multiplicity of talents, and you can not only learn from people, but then start teaching people. And this is a key thing about learning. You know, like teaching is one of the most potent learning methods there are out there. I was just doing this the other night with my daughter, who had an assignment to draw something, and I was sort of like dusting off my own, you know, very small drawing knowledge, but trying to communicate that to her, give her a few tips, and it just kind of reinforces the whole cycle in such a great way. And so I just really miss being out there with people, and this was you know, as a sort of middle-aged male, there's been studies on this. You know, making new friends is not something that we're as a species particularly great at. We, you know, sort of have our settled life, and you know, and here's the thing about learning, you know, it requires you to have a certain humility, that the idea that you have something that is out there that you need to learn, that you're willing to learn. Men, you know, sometimes don't do as well on this. So just as sort of a side note, thinking of that group of New York women you're talking about who are surfing. I mean, I found this so often in these courses, that often they were dominated by women, and then that women were really the ones putting themselves out there and with this willingness to learn and to grow. And I think, I think the ratio is roughly 12-3, I think, surfers of women to men.
Wow.
When we were on an open water swim course, the only other male was one of the instructors. I was the only male. So yeah, it's just, you know, I'm sure there.
In your description of the open water swim course by this woman named Patricia, right? Was she 70 and she came from Chamonix or something?
Yeah, and she was a pack-a-day smoker who had only recently quit. I think in her late 60s, she decided suddenly, you know, I'm going to change. And then she didn't know how to swim, but she was reading an in-flight magazine one day and saw this article about swimming vacations and thought, I would like to do that. This sounds wonderful. So she went to the local, you know, the French equivalent of the YMCA, tried to get an adult swim class. They didn't have it. They only offered classes for kids. So undaunted, she went on
I can see
YouTube.
that happening in France, right? We don't have Emma too. Exactly.
Yeah, yes. If you haven't learned by now, yes. But so she started watching stuff. Then she went to the pool, had her sister film her to try to get, because it's hard to know if you're doing it the right way. So then maybe a year later, suddenly she's in the Bahamas, outrunning the school of Barracuda and leaving me in the dust as well. And, and so when I left her, I was when the trip was breaking up, I said, what are you going to do now? And she's like, I'm wanting to learn quantum physics and then she said pickleball. And I was like, what the hell is pickleball? And I was the last person to know about pickleball being, the greatest unknown sport.
Oh my God, pickleball has reached France. I don't know if that's something to celebrate. As you're going through I see that we have some enthusiastic people ready to ask questions, but I do want to touch on surfing. I feel like that was particularly transcendent for you. So can you tell us how that changed you as a person?
I mean, just by, number one, as a person living in a city, why did it not occur to me that I could take a subway or a 45-minute drive from my, sort of crowded Brooklyn neighborhood and be in the ocean, with pods of dolphins, swimming around me and looking, at the sunset. It almost didn't matter if I could surf. Just sitting on the board in that water and bobbing up and down on the board was almost enough. I mean, I sort of, had to have my pride, so I had to try to catch a wave or two. But so that really just, number one, I think, some of us just get so, especially New Yorkers, right, get such tunnel vision about, the not looking very far. The lesson is you don't have to look very far. This stuff was in my backyard. And then, but, so the problem with surfing is that, we might sense this, is that it's a very kind of exclusionary act. And we've all heard about these sort of like gangs of locals that will like vandalize your car if you park at their brake or something. Or maybe you haven't heard of that.
No.
But, it's a little, there's a bit of an intimidation factor there. So I'd like to say that, places like Rockaway in Queens, you can find that at certain breaks at certain times, but you can also find wonderfully open people who are learning themselves. And again, you're just finding this community in the water. Even during the pandemic, it was, it's very socially distanced activity. So it kind of kept me sane. And yeah, I guess the key takeaway for me was that it was something I'd wanted to do my entire life. I mean, I grew up in the Midwest, so it wasn't really a thing I could do for a while, but the clock kept ticking. We're down to like the 3-second mark. Do I take a 3-point shot at the buzzer here? Yeah, and so I did, and pick it up. And I mean, so you don't have to. It's really never too late. I would argue there were people surfing in Costa Rica I met that were in their 60s and 70s. I mean, it's kind of there's just certain mindset. I mean, surfing, you need a certain physical capacity. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but that can be picked up. But mindset is everything. Like I said, I'm just deep in the mindset game, growth mindset. Excuse me.
I love this question because it speaks to, I was going to ask you, is there a kind of art to sucking, right? And this person says it in a much more poetic way. Do you have any advice for pushing past the fear of failure or embarrassment when trying a new pursuit?
Yeah, I mean, I, for one, actually found it very liberating. I mean, because as a journalist, especially, I have this imposter syndrome that I think we all possibly have. I wrote a book about traffic, and I was giving talks to traffic engineers, people who have advanced degrees in traffic engineering, spend their whole life studying traffic. I wrote this book, and I talk about imposter syndrome. I'm going in there, and so what was liberating for some of these things about me was that no one thought I was good. So there was no fear of imposter syndrome because I was a beginner. I was expected to be terrible. So if any moment I wasn't terrible was actually this huge, winning moment. But I think one of the main things was just to keep your goals just really small and approachable and sort of
remember what mediocre means, right?
Yeah. I mean, but even before that, before you're even thinking about the great heights of mediocrity, just think about like, okay, today I'm just going to try to, paddle the board. It's just the smallest micro skill. And if you do that, then move along from there. But just don't get hung up on, I have to, come in and crush this in 2 months because I saw this online or something, and I want to check this box off. And I think that can be a recipe for real disappointment. And so I went in with all these things having just no expectations, no goals. I thought if I could just learn something about it, maybe I could acquire a little bit of competence, and that competence, even at the small levels, again, this virtuous cycle where it just makes you feel good, and you can then build on that, even though you have these setbacks. But I think, a surf instructor, very wisely told me, like, just don't. And again, he implicated men in this. I don't want to implicate men too much, but he said that they come in, particularly men, with these like, oh yeah, I'm going to be at Hawaii in like 2 years, and then like after 5 weeks, they still haven't caught their first wave. So they're suffering out there, but just take it as it comes. It sounds like a platitude, I know, but just keep your horizons very short there.
I mean, I think that's the sort of the continual thread throughout this. It's not this book. I feel like I'm on the Home Shopping Network. This book, it's not right. It's not a primer for how to change your life through juggling or drawing. It's how to change the way you move through this world by embracing beginning over and over, whatever that means to you, right? By embracing sucking and being vulnerable and being hopeful and having low expectations for achieving, but infectiously joyful expectations for connecting with something, with yourself or with other people.
Yeah, and even in the throes of being bad at something, you're still expanding yourself. I mean, your husband, if he learns to play a song, even if he's not playing it that well, he's still a poorly performing saxophonist. Whereas a few weeks ago, he was not a saxophonist at all. But now, he's on the road to getting better. But so this self-expansion has happened, almost instantaneously. And I think, again, I don't want to make this entirely just a midlife book, but you get to a certain point in life where you feel pretty well defined by who you are. You have your career, and people expect certain things of you, and you start to feel a little hemmed in. And so suddenly to be able to throw this thing out at them like, hey, did you know I'm doing X? You sort of get a little like, frisson of pleasure there, right?
Yeah, it does. In non-pandemic times, it does make for good like cocktail party talk, right? Like, yeah, I'm learning how to juggle or whatever. Yeah. And you call that, what does that, is it the Einstellung effect of getting too comfortable? What was the German word? It's like your comfort zone in your brain.
Oh, that's that's just from experiments. Trying to talk about like expert performance, and there's a great study about London taxi drivers, who famously have to memorize the map of London. When you put them on, when you throw them into a new imaginary city and ask them to navigate the city as novice cab drivers, they're really not that good at it. They're almost worse than the novices trying, because they have so much of London in their brain that they can't shift over to this new thing. And this is, I'll just say, the problem that bedevils us all as older learners also is that we have a lot of accumulated knowledge. I mean, if you've given a young child a smartphone, and there's a reason they're so good at it. I mean, it's probably one of the first, but it's one of the first smartphones they've seen. Like, they don't know a world where you had a rotary dial phone, a push button phone, the first smartphone. We have a lot of memory and old muscle memory in our hands that, then we get this new device, we're like fumbling with it. So
I love this question. Was there any new pursuit that you attempted that you will never, in all caps, try again?
Great question. I mean, nothing for the book, but I'm sure there's something else out there. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, a corollary question people also ask is, what do you have any other upcoming things? And there's
of those. Everybody wants to know what's coming up for 2021.
Yeah, I mean, but I love suggestions. And I was just reading about, there's the kind of medically sanctioned I'm just throwing this out there. Medically sanctioned, psychedelic experiences you can now take in the state of Oregon. I mean this is nothing this is nothing I've had any interest in my entire life. But again, just because I haven't had interest, I don't want that to be a barrier. My entire life I hated yoga, or I thought I did. Or hate is the wrong word. I just had no knowledge of it, no conception. I had sort of like no interest in doing it. But the pandemic came along. Suddenly my habits are disrupted. I can't go outside as much. I can't go to the gym. I need something to do with my body besides sit on my stationary bike all day. So I turned to yoga. Now I'm like this weird beginner zealot of yoga. So go figure.
Lisa asks, this is an interesting question. In your research, did you find differences in pursuing new hobbies at older ages across different cultures worldwide? She says, for example, in Italy, where the Renaissance fostered apprenticeships, is there still a culture pursuing new hobbies at older ages compared to the US?
Great question. I don't have anything that comes to mind or data about that, unfortunately. But it's something
I wonder if Americans are more reticent to try something new because we're in such a culture of achievement. And go ahead.
No. Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, this is one of my things I was trying to sort of work against in the book a little bit. It is this idea of endless mastery and constantly needing to hit these performance benchmarks, not just in work, but in life. And
which you mentioned is really amplified by social media.
Yeah, like we're all trying to present, our best self. And, I feel the pressure to put up pictures of me catching a wave. I have many pictures of me like getting dumped on my head, which, should really be what's on Instagram, because that's the more common activity, but which I embrace. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would suspect it's a good thing that I'd like to look into a little bit more. But yeah, so I don't have any hard data.
When you mentioned that about social media in the book, it also made me think about YouTube videos, because I know a lot of people turn to YouTube videos to learn how, and yet I always find them, they're misleading, right? Because they're done by experts and they're edited. So everything I'm a pretty good baker. And when I go to a YouTube video to show me how to make, for example, for my daughter's Harry Potter birthday, a beautiful Hedwig cake, right? The snowy white owl. I'm like, wait, slow down. I have to watch them 13 times and still feel bad about myself.
This is why we need a whole genre of beginner how-to videos, beginners teaching other beginners how to do things, and fumbling, and like me setting up the IKEA furniture that took an entire weekend. Like that would be a very instructional thing, because people could take that weekend journey with me and waste 48 hours of their day. But because this is a point
that reality show Nailed It, when very amateur bakers try to do something amazing. And I think we all love it because we're like, it's shared humanity.
Yeah, and this is the problem with the idea of trying to learn from people who are amazing at their craft, like a football camp with Lionel Messi. I mean, what is he going to be able to show a beginning soccer player that he could even explain to you that you could pick up? So there's these things out there like the masterclass program, which as a pedagogical tool, I think is, I'm just going to go on the record and say, almost to my mind, useless. As a way to understand more about the person giving that masterclass. Sure, it's sort of like a TED talk or a biography, but you're not going to learn how to play chess from Garry Kasparov on his 5-hour masterclass. That's not the most effective way to learn how to play chess. You have to, there's other ways. But anyway, I'm sure you could learn a lot about Garry, but just not chess.
What was your very, very most vulnerable moment in all of this beginning?
Weirdly, probably singing something to the my wonderful, although she was then kind of a stranger, singing coach, that she just wanted me to plunge right in and come up with something on the spot. And it was like I couldn't even get it out the first time. My throat croaked. I was constricting. I had to drink 7 gallons of water, and I just had so many thoughts running through my head. And this is the thing about singing. nerves are not great for singing because it tenses your body. You want you want your body to be, sort of relaxed and open and flowing so yeah, so that, it was just a one-on-one thing, which sounds weird, but just singing, it's such a, like you said, a vulnerable moment. It's just like I think I call it a secret back channel to the heart. Like you don't sing to people generally who aren't your children, like in a closed room, one-on-one. And so it's a weird experience, number one, but also very intimidating.
And what was, if you had to choose one, what was the most joyful moment in all of this learning?
Joyful moment. Probably one of these, the choir concerts, I would say, especially, the ones where people came to the shows were great, and a lot of them were friends. It's sort of a friendly crowd. Let's not joke around here. But there were other ones we did that were for, let's say hospital settings, as kind of a, organization that puts choirs into places, because music has this proven ability to make people feel better. It has this restorative therapeutic, as much for the people doing it as for the people listening to it. So, those were some just amazingly powerful moments that, I would not have been privy to had I not, opened these few little sets of doors that were admittedly had kind of a high barrier to entry to me in my mind. But once I did, I sort of couldn't look back. And it's just a funny thing to kind of play this choose your own adventure, like to think back, like, what if I hadn't done that? Where would I be now? Probably fine, but I'd be missing these, sort of dimensions of my life that I now find, incredibly just satisfying and rewarding. So yeah, open the door. That's my 3-word advice, open the door.
It made me want to go and join a choir as soon as I get vaccinated. I was very struck by, I know we're almost out of time, but I have to mention this because it blew my mind. This app called Smool, is that how you pronounce it?
Smule, which was kind of a weird condensation of the phrase sonic mule. Don't even ask me where that comes from, but Smule, S-M-U-L-E, yeah.
So anyone who's jonesing to sing with someone else during the pandemic, can you briefly explain how this works?
Sure, it's online karaoke. It's a startup by a guy who was a Stanford graduate and was a music kind of nut, and had this idea that music was this gift that, again, people often felt intimidated by. You wanted to sort of bring it out into the world. So it's this kind of, during the pandemic, it's been a lifesaver because
you can duet. Right?
You sing duets or even group singing with people around the world. And it sounds like a weird thing, but I've sung duets with, I have these friends now who are in, southern Spain and England and Texas and and we're doing, some of this stuff should probably not see the light of day, but if anyone wants to join me, I'm not going to sing on camera, but I will give out I go by Adult Beginner. That's my handle on Smule. If anyone is curious about this, I'd be happy to do a duet with you. But it's just, again, it's something you do.
I'm writing
to make one last point about learning. I think one of the key things here is making things easy is a great way to achieve success. Human nature is to default to the easy choice. So singing, of all these things I took on, was probably the one that registered the most because it's the one I can practice the most, the one I can perform the most. Anywhere. You don't need special equipment. You don't have to go to a beach, and it makes you feel good. So just, I love surfing, but it's a hard skill in which to go up because you number one, it has to be a good day to go surfing. Number two, you have to not have a job that day, which is not, I do have work I have to do. I can't just surf all the time. But then you have to get waves, and then someone described it as, trying to learn guitar if you can only strum once an hour. That's just not a very productive way to learn how to play guitar, right? So it takes the feedback loops are very long in surfing. But singing, obviously you can do anywhere. So that's, it kind of stuck the most in a way because I was able to do it the most.
I had a lot of envy reading, I think healthy envy reading this book. It really churned the feels. And the way you write about your journey is, it's moving, it's funny, and it's moving. So thank you. I feel like I'm revving for the pandemic to be over, but I know I don't need to wait that long. Do you have, just kind of to wrap it up, do you have a favorite quotation about beginning? I mean, you have great quotations in this book, some of which are from Winston Churchill. But is there a favorite one, a kind of mantra for you?
Geez, I should have something, but
I'll tell you one that comes to mind when we were.
Yeah, please tell me yours. Yeah.
We were tweeting about this event yesterday. Somebody was following the thread, quoted G.K. Chesterton, who said, "Anything worth doing is worth doing badly." I thought that's so wonderful, right?
Yeah, and I entirely agree. And you know, if you're in the moment, it often doesn't feel bad. Even if you're doing it badly, it doesn't feel bad. We should make a distinction there, that, you know, there's two different things that can be going on at the same time, to think dialectically, if you will. But yeah, so yeah, well, thank you so much, Faith. And I'm ready. I'm thinking, you know, your husband on sax, I'll sing. If you would tap dance.
Mule you and tap dance. I just expect you to juggle while you sing. Is that okay?
Deal.
Thank you, Tom. I'm
Thank you so much.
glad I read this book.
That was lovely. And I really want to see this concert. If it doesn't happen, I'm going to be really disappointed. Just going to throw that out there. Tom, Faith, thank you so much for being here and talking to us all. This has been an amazing discussion. And thank you everyone at home who is tuning in and showing up for authors, publishers, indie book selling, and our incredible staff here at Harvard Bookstore. Check the links in the chat if you're interested in purchasing beginners. And please remember to shop indie and shop local. From all of us at Harvard Bookstore, be well, have a good night, stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Bye, thanks.